Welcome to the Permanent Podcast, real talk about owning, operating, buying, and selling small businesses. The reality is that businesses are made up of people, and people are messy. So, how do you navigate such a messy and complicated landscape? Well, let's talk about it on the Permanent Podcast. Welcome to the Permanent Podcast. We have an exciting episode today. We spoke with a woman named Claire Hughes Johnson, and I thought it was a great conversation, Brent. Brent, who's Claire Hughes Johnson?
Yeah, this conversation was fantastic. She ran a big chunk of Google for a long time. Like if you've interacted with Gmail, YouTube, Google AdWords, really any of the core Google products, like she has had an impact on your life. And she took Stripe from 200-ish people to 8,000. I mean, like very few people in the world who have done things like this. And the conversation for me was just, it was a joy.
Agreed.
She is a thoughtful, kind, generous, but also like no BS, kind of hard charging person as well, which I appreciate about her. She has this really interesting mix of people first approach, but with a sort of no nonsense, get stuff done attitude. And it's very rare to find those two things kind of in concert. I mean, I think this is a sign of maturity on her part. And, you know, we even talk about this, how she's grown over the years in the episode, but usually find people who are hard charging, get stuff done. And look, I can speak from experience. It's easy to get goal-induced blindness. Or you get people who are soft and gentle and people first, and it's all about, but then, you know, it's hard to get them to get something done. She seems to combine these two things in a masterful way, and I think there's a lot to learn from her.
I loved her book, and I will, in the podcast, talk it up a lot. But it's had a huge impact on me, and I'm still working through it, and I can't recommend it enough. So I'm really excited about today's episode. Let's dive into our conversation with Claire Hughes Johnson on the Permanent Podcast. If you're willing, I'd love to kick off our conversation with my book review. Are you willing to hear my review?
I am always ready for feedback.
It's a 2-word review. Have you seen Spinal Tap? I always laugh when I
Of course.
It's a 2-word review. No,
this
my
one
review
goes to 11.
That's right. They have a bit where he's reading to the actors who are playing this rock band. He's making up stuff that they're reacting to as they're filming it. So it's kind of one of the first off the cuff. And he goes, it's a 2-word review, talking about their album Shit Sandwich. and they're both, all the actors start laughing, but they're trying to stay in character. No, my 2 words are not Shit Sandwich.
I was going to say, that's like what they say about bad feedback too.
I was going to say,
right?
Holy cow.
A feedback sandwich.
Give him the sandwich.
My 2 words are thank you. And I want to explain that. Well, you know, whenever you're going to interview someone, you want to do your due diligence and read the book. And so I got it, and I saw it was a hefty book. So I was like, well, I'll just have I'll have to do a healthy skim on this one, just to come prepared. And I would say by the time I got to the chapter 1 exercises, I slowed way down. And this book has become a guide for my thinking time of late. It is meeting me totally on a felt need level. I have been giving it away as gifts. We've ordered a few copies for the team here. And so I just wanted to say thank you to you for writing it.
Wow.
Thank you to the Stripe Press team for creating a beautiful book. And I love the QR code footnotes, by the way. It's super engaging. I love holding it in my hand and people walk by and see it and they're like, oh, what's that? So thank you to the team for that. And thank you to you for coming on our podcast today. So.
Oh, wow. Thank you, Dave. That means a lot. That really does. And over the weekend, I got a thank you note from a product manager at Ramp who I've never met. And it was lovely. It really means a lot that it's so useful because that's the goal. The goal is that the book is very practical and useful.
Yeah, I can't wait to see how widely it's shared because it feels like one of those books that, you know, you sort of do the initial launch, get the excitement behind it. And then what really drives books adoption is if the book's good or not. And it feels like the book is so good that I can't wait to see. I have a feeling you're going to sell more copies a year from now than you do next month. And then it'll continue to sort of ramp up. I think it'll break the trends.
Well, I really do appreciate that. And I'm thrilled to be on with both of you. I'm very excited about this conversation.
I'm really curious, you know, when you go through the process of writing a book, and Brent, you've written a book, maybe you could even answer this too. Is there a moment of sort of self-transformation as you're writing it? And then is there a moment when it's finally published where something changes in the eyes or the ears or the whatever of other people around you, where you went from kind of being known as someone who's successful and had success to now being an author who maybe is a thought leader or having impact. Is there a moment of transformation for you, Claire?
For me, maybe I'm in it. I guess I would say the book was not originally my idea. It was Patrick and John Collison, the Stripe co-founders, really encouraged/forced me to write it. And then, of course, I did finish it. So I did play a part. But I think that in writing it, I was full of self-doubt about whether it was going to be, because it's very much based on my learnings and my experiences. And I could have written a version that was, included a lot of academic or organizational behavior research, but I also had a job while I wrote this book. So I sort of just focused on what I felt I'd learned and learned from many people, by the way, not just from myself. And I was full of self-doubt. And then there was a moment right before, right at the end of the process, which is a long process, where I reread a bunch of sections and I thought, wow, some of these I'm actually proud of.
That's pretty good.
I think I've said what I need to say. I thought that felt good, though I was still full of a lot of doubt. And then I think the book's really been received in the way it was intended. And the goal that Patrick and John had was just, they felt like it wasn't fair that they couldn't scale me, which was nice of them. But they felt that a lot of how I think about organizational systems and people management were things they benefited from. And a lot of Stripe's belief system is to share and to make, of course, an API for payments is a way of sharing and saying, look, you don't have to build your own billing and payment stack. We'll do it for you. And I think we also care a lot about entrepreneurship and sharing information in a way that it doesn't matter where you are in the world, you should be able to get the information. And that's why Stripe Press exists, frankly. And so I feel good about the mission. And then in the last few weeks, people have been treating me like an author. Yeah. And so that's been pretty astonishing. And I've had some people at Stripe actually send me Slack messages and congratulate me on the new phase of my career, which I'm sure both of you have given plenty of career advice to folks, but there is a thing that happens in your career where sometimes it gets handed to you. You don't go seeking it. And I think it's getting handed to me right now. And so I'm having to assume the mantle of author and get used to that. But Brent, I wonder what you think.
Yeah, well, I was just going to say that the thing that really stood out to me is the values of Stripe and your values. I mean, it's just such a perfect clicking together and alignment. And it came through in the book so strongly. Like I was able to have dinner with John Collison, gosh, I don't know, probably 3.5 years ago now. And the dinner I had with him, it mirrored a lot of the things that you said in the book, which I thought was a really interesting parallel for me. And it really made it come alive that I love organizations where the exterior brand very much aligns with how everything else is put together. And so whether the organizations that you're a part of, it seems like there's a transcendence amongst them that it comes through.
That's very cool.
That's great to hear. And I say in the book actually that I think John and Patrick and I are all quite different, but we have a lot of, it's like a Venn diagram. We have a big overlap area in sort of values. And it's hard to explain that, but I think that's what we learned over the last 8 years or 10 years now.
For sure. I had a question. So when you first started writing the book, how quickly were you able to get the sort of the initial core draft of the book done compared to the final time to get the finished product out the door?
Oh, well, I feel like there's a long answer and a short answer. The book had a couple of different, I mentioned this in the acknowledgments, but I was still actively full-time the COO of Stripe when we started this book. And this was just before COVID. So the book mostly happened during COVID, which actually I think helped. But right before we were dealing with a pandemic, we had a Stripe who had been worked for me in our BizOps team and then became a product manager. And she was sort of in between. She was taking some time off. And Patrick's plan was that she was going to interview me and record it and then write up the transcripts and sort of partner with me for a half an hour a week because that was about all I had. And so that first draft was probably more of a first draft of the first few chapters. That came together actually quite quickly in when she and I partnering and me sort of talking. But then I had to confront more of the guts, because a lot of the initial chapters are a little bit more of how I think about leadership and management, my personal principles, some of the stuff on the operating frameworks. But the hiring chapter, which is a long chapter, I needed to just do it. I needed to write it and think about the structure of that. So the first few chapters were pretty fast is the answer.
Yeah.
A few chapters took quite a bit more time, and then Aka ended up getting a job, good for her, and then she ended up as the head of product at Notion, and now she's a co-founder of a new company, which is exciting. But she drifted out of my life, and so we had to find me an editor to partner, because a lot of structuring this material, because it's meant to be more of a reference manual.
Yeah.
It has a sort of look like that. And sort of thinking about how to keep it in the pillars I had in my mind, but also address in each chapter. There's sort of an individual contributor version. Like if you're hiring leaders is a little bit different. And so there's a leader section, there's an individual contributor section. And that's similar in the performance feedback chapter. So she was great. The editor helped me. In the book has a lot about reorgs, and she helped me reorg the book a few times. But so that took a while. It took longer than I thought. You need to get space from it, right? You need to write down and then come back later and say, does this really make sense?
It's almost like a breathing in and out of ideas, and then sort of a reconsumption of them in which you iterate on it. Yeah, that's the exact same experience I had. And it was like the initial draft got done quickly, and then it took 18 months, I feel like, to get the final thing out.
Brent wrote a book called Messy Marketplace, and it's a guide for small business owners on how to think through a sale when they're thinking through what's next. And so he wrote that years ago, and I would say it was a transformative experience, not only for you, but for the firm.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it was really just born more annoyance that we had to have the same conversation.
Over
it was like the same 7 hours of conversations with every seller.
Let's write it down.
It was like, can I just hand you a book instead?
I can definitely relate to that.
I feel like that. I always write out of like selfishness and my own need, and so I hope that the book serves you well in that same way of being able to give it to somebody and say, hey, can you? Here's how I think about people. Can you just read this, please? So.
Exactly. Well, I find it I still find it novel to say, well, in my book, you sort of say this crazy thing, but I've
already said that before. Would you take the time to go read it in my 450
terrible.
page
It sounds
book?
terrible.
I love it.
But one thing that I did do, I'll admit, was, I had sort of a Google Doc of the book, of course, and I was sending sections of it to founders that I was advising over the last few years before it got published. And I had to put the, fear of reprisal in them. I'd say, you cannot share this. This is confidential. It's not published. But I think it'd be better if you just read this section of the book before we talk, because it saves you time, both of you. If they're going to get the same speech from me, they might as well read it.
You're scaling people. You're just scaling you. That's
trying to scale me. That's what John Carlson said. He said, we need to scale Claire.
There you go.
I'm actually very, if you're willing, would love to dive in on just a couple things that resonated with me and Brent from the book that we think would resonate with our listeners. I agree. I think this book is 100% worth owning. And I think the framing of sort of, did you say reference manual? The concept of going back
like
to
a guide.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's how I kind of, as I realized the daunting task of reading it straight through, there were certain sections like, well, that's not for me right now, or what it felt. And I skipped over it to the other stuff. And there was every section had something more helpful to me that was aligning with what I was thinking through that day. And so I would love to, if you're willing, just kind of go through a couple things from the book. Is that okay?
Of course.
I think, as I'm sitting here with two authors, I have not written a book. So I'm going to give you, as we all experience, we all read books. There's that moment when you're reading a book, Brent, and you're kind of trying to decide, or you're feeling the author out. You're deciding, am I in? Am I connecting with you? Am I aligning with what you're saying?
Is it worth it?
Do I trust you? Is it worth it? Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And Claire, there was a moment for me, it was in chapter 1, and you completely earned my trust as a reader when you described your team member who was managing with a place of high transparency and communication, and it was creating some problems for the organization. And I love that story for two reasons. One is, I appreciated hearing about people, because you're going to read a book called Scaling People. There's kind of something in the back of your head where like, this might be devoid of all acknowledgement that people are people, right? This could be super utilitarian about it. And so it was, in fact, going to let me know. It let me know this was, in fact, going to be a book very connected to people's stories and managing people as humans. Good. And I just love if you'd be willing to maybe share that story in whatever, verbal form you want to share and kind of your takeaway from it. And I think that could launch into some good conversations here.
Yeah. I mean, this was a really pivotal moment for me, the story as a manager becoming a leader, I will say. I had just at Google taken on quite a big new role leading what we called online sales and operations at the time. And I had, for the first time, a team, I think I had over 100 or 200, between 100 and 200 people managers in my org. So my org was big, right? That means you had, a couple thousand people. And I had a great HR partner who, she sort of said, I have this idea, we're going to get all the managers together, which of course I wanted to do. But my inclination was let's get together and talk tactics, talk about the plan, talk about how we're doing against the numbers. What are we going to do next year? I wanted to make it more of a business. And she had an excellent insight, which is, these folks don't all really know each other. This org is sort of new with you as the leader. And what if we did something that was more about values and about, some personal connection. And I said, I'm always game for that. But because I tend to lean that way anyway, especially with my smaller teams, like my direct reports. But I was like, really? Do you think we can do this at some scale? And she had this guy that she'd worked with named Stan Slapp, who is a sort of leadership consultant in San Francisco, whose book, by the way, Bury My Heart in Conference Room B, I have in the bibliography, and I want to credit him. But he led us through, he got to this offsite, and he told a personal story about himself and his values that was very compelling. And then he said, I'm going to lead you all through an exercise. And we were all at these round tables, and we went through and sort of said, he gave a list of about 100 values, things like family, ambition, competition, integrity, you get the idea, trust. And he gave this list of values, and every table had to go and sort of go from 100. Each of us had to get to 10, and then 5, and then 3. And it was inspiring a lot of these small table discussions about, what motivates me? Is it learning? What is the value in people telling stories? And then Stan said, I want to invite a few of you to come up and talk to the whole group, right? So this is a big deal because it's, more than 100 people in the room. It's pretty personal. And I was very impressed. A couple people from the team, and including encouraged by their table of their colleagues, got up. And one of them was this individual who I call in the book Eli. And Eli gets up and tells a story that his value is transparency. And his story boils down to being a very young boy, 7, 8 years old, and realizing that something is wrong with his mother, that she is not well, seeing her, at night, seeing her in the bathroom, changing her clothes, sort of the way she was behaving. She would disappear. He had a stepfather. She'd be gone for a few days, but no one really was telling him. And remember, he's of an age that is, I think as a parent, you sort of don't know how much you tell a kid who's maybe 7, 6, 7, 8. And then he's in school one day, and his stepfather comes to pick him up, and halfway through the day takes him out for pancakes and tells him his mother has died of breast cancer. And he, of course, was changed forever. But what he held on to that as a value was, how could you not have told me? How could you have not been transparent? I knew something was wrong, and yet no one included me. And this aha moment for me, by the way, of course, we're all in the room, many of us in tears. He's in tears. We're thinking about the implications of that for him, but I'm also his manager, I happen to be, and I'm thinking about a challenge I've had with him, which is that he tells his team way too much information about what, the underpinnings of what we're trying to figure out. And I'm in the middle of making changes in the organization because I'm the new leader, right? And we're having these open conversations about possible different org structures. We actually had a lot of conversations about compensation. This was a team that I was trying to transform, frankly, into more of a sales team. It had been more of a support customer success team. And we needed to change a lot of the systems of operating, the metrics of success, but also the compensation structure. And he was oversharing, which created a challenge for all the other managers because his team would know that there might be a compensation change. I think you both probably know well, the minute you're touching people's compensation, it creates a lot of anxiety and a lot of interest. And you really want to figure it out and roll it out carefully. And he got ahead of us. And I finally, instead of giving him feedback and saying, look, Eli, you keep surprising the rest of the management team by telling your team stuff that we're not figured out on how we're going to explain it yet, or what we're doing even. And he would kind of get the feedback, but he wouldn't stop. And then I finally could have a conversation with him, which I call sort of the meta conversation, or the conversation about the conversation. And I could say, look, Eli, I think I get it now. I think your value, your number one value, and now I understand why, is transparency. And you feel you're being loyal and caring for your team by telling them everything. And he said, yeah, exactly. And that's what I have to do. And I said, well, can we just think about this differently? Because in fact, you're actually creating a lot of anxiety for your team when you're telling them something that might not be correct or might not be fully thought out. And he said, yeah, I can see. I mean, it was almost like we were playing out probably the same, I mean, of course, at a very different level, dynamic of what a parent has to figure out, which is, how do I protect this individual, but also include them? And we ended up having a really good moment about what were the terms of that. What does that look like when you're a manager of a team and you have responsibility also to your colleagues and to the organization? And from then on, we could have, again, a meta conversation when he started to get too transparent and really talk about what was the right thing to do for the team, as opposed to transparency at all costs. But I also stopped criticizing his inclination to be transparent, right? Because I get it.
Right.
I get it.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like when you were actually probably having that conversation with him, in some ways, he was probably replaying what happened to him when he was a child, right? And like maybe providing empathy for the incredibly unthinkable, difficult situation that he was in, his mother was in, stepfather was in. And I think that it is interesting how, these early events in our lives shape, who we become. I'd like to dig in a little bit on transparency. And when you think about transparency as a value, because I think in many ways people sort of assume transparency is always a positive value. And so for you to be able to say, hey, transparency has to be balanced. How do you think about the amount of transparency that you offer to people, and in what ways, and how do you, even bringing up transparency, I feel like sometimes, or letting people know that you're not completely transparent, almost builds a distrust.
Yeah,
how do you work
dirty.
against that and provide transparency in an appropriate context?
Yeah. No, and particularly, right, in tech companies, I mean, it's really a very hallowed value because it does build trust. And people also, it shows respect. It says, look, we can all know the same information and we're rational people who want to do the right thing. Yeah, let me talk about that, because I really confronted that at Stripe, actually. When I joined the company, Stripe had a really strong belief. Actually, just what I later uncovered is, I think many of the employees interpreted it as a belief in transparency. The founders interpreted it slightly differently, which I'll explain. But all of the emails that were sent in the company were copied to email lists so that every employee could read everything that was being communicated. So take a minute and process that. It was still a small company. But, I joined, it was at 160 people. And so anytime I sent a note to a customer, for example, I was either direct copying or blind copying a list that was like customer emails from this team. And then anyone in the company, any engineer, could go and subscribe to that Google group and read all the emails. And many did, by the way. And there was this sort of interesting feedback culture of, you'd get this random email from someone you'd never met in the company, especially if you were new. And they would say, hey, by the way, you told the customer this thing about the product and you're slightly wrong. Let me tell you how it actually works. Which on the one hand, by the way, was great. I mean, very rapid learning. Like it was like a group learning and feedback culture, but sometimes scary and intimidating, and created some real fear and support in the sales team.
Well, I think twice about firing off any email. I mean, I'd be very careful not to include anything in an email that I wouldn't want the entire company to read.
Right. So everything, I mean, this is exactly it. Everything has an externality, right? You do one thing with great intentions, and then you're going to deal with when you sort of push on something, there's going to be a bulge on the other side. And that's the externality, is exactly that, is creates some fear of judgment and criticism. So all to say, I get to Stripe, and I clarified with the founders, like, hey, is this actually like a cultural underpinning? Like everything must be transparent. And no. The transparency is in the interest of people having the knowledge they need to do the best work. And I said, okay, well, that's a little different than saying we're going to tell everyone everything all the time. And so I started to clarify a lot of internal communication about what we meant by the sort of let's copy all of our emails to people culture. And then I also started to say, let me set your expectations, folks. There are going to be things that we are not transparent about immediately. Things like, well, first of all, a legal situation, an HR situation. Would you want a confidential matter that's happening, to be revealed? No. In your life? No. This is actually, if you care about other people you work with, you're going to start thinking of cases where you would want information to be kept confidential, and people are nodding. And so I think the way it worked at Stripe, as much as I could create, was let's distinguish between the value, which is let's share information to help everyone have context to make great local decisions, right? Global context to make local decisions. But let's also think about what isn't valuable to share that is either confidential or frankly distracting. I mean, this is a question, I think, when you are looking at compensation changes, until you've really done all the analysis, all the thinking, looked at the cultural implications, looked at the financial implications, and written a communication plan, it is just not productive to say to people, we're thinking of changing your pay. It creates distraction and anxiety, and it won't impact the outcome. I get like 100, of course we're going to consult people as we go through the decision, like the sales team and what do incentives mean to them, but we are not going to include 160 people in a compensation decision. People didn't all believe in that, but they at least respected that there was an intellectual and sort of first principles argument behind what are things we might not be transparent about. And I think, honestly, being transparent, this is now getting very meta, about the fact that you are not going to always be transparent. Setting that expectation is really what matters.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And I have to confess, early in my career, I would use transparency as a sort of a battering ram, right? Like I would just be transparent with people, and it was really for my good and not for their good.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's, for me, where I've settled on the principle is I want to be as transparent as I can for the good of the other. Yes, so I want to maximize my transparency, but always with the intention of helping and being caring and kind and generous to the other person. And when the line is crossed where it is more for my benefit than for their benefit, then that's where I'm transgressing something that I shouldn't.
Yes.
And I think that's exactly what you're saying is you have to, in an organization, take into account the opportunity costs, not just for the good of the person you're speaking to, but for the good of all the others that are around them, and understand the consequences of language. I mean, we can do great harm or great good with the words that we have, and people take it personally, almost all the things personally.
Even beyond words, just the posture, the emotional state you're walking into, whatever situation as a manager you're in.
No, for sure.
Yeah, it's about empathy. Yeah.
It is about empathy. And I can tell just by the way and the nuance that you talk about people that you have a deep heart for others. Have you always had that? Has that been like something that is just a God-given gift to you? Or is that something that you've worked to change in your life? And if so, what were kind of like the major moments of change where people became, I would say, more important?
Yeah. I think there's two answers. So I do have something that I think has been true. I had a babysitter when I was like 4 or 5 years old who told my mother that I'd been here before, meaning that I was sort of wise and weirdly perceptive. And so I think that I have some people intuition and a little bit of a radar. Like if I'm in, this is going to sound a little strange, but if I'm in a room with people and there's someone like giving a talk, or I literally like physically can feel the room if emotions start to run. So like I could feel sick to my stomach, or I feel like a little bit like, ooh, people are uncomfortable, and I can't explain it. But I think I've always had a little bit of a sixth sense on the experiences of other humans in my immediate surroundings. And that has been true for a long time. However, I also have a very get shit done work orientation. Like I'm just very high energy, I like to think I'm high output and pretty tactical and task oriented. I'm like, we got to get, like, I really pride myself on, like, if someone says, hey, we got to get to B, I'll be the first one leading the way on making the plan. How do you get from A to B? How do you get like step 1, step 2? And I think in my earlier life and earlier career, I wasn't really using my empathy skill very much. I was just driving to the finish line, right? And I think I had to get some real feedback. There's actually a story about that in the book, that I wasn't taking into account, bringing people along and the process and the fact that I shouldn't be the only one with all the answers. And I think that was a journey. It's still a journey. I'll still, when I'm under pressure, I'll just start executing, right? I'll just start.
I call it goal-induced blindness.
Yeah,
where you just want to get the thing done, and you know where you're headed, and you're like, look, I have a vision. Can you please just get in line?
Yeah, and you also convince yourself that it's good for the other people, right?
Correct.
You're like, but I can get this done faster, and so just listen to me, But that's not very productive for them to trust,
Yeah, well, I want to press on that though, because sometimes it is actually very productive. Right. And so how do you?
But they have to trust you, right?
Right.
Because if they don't trust you, then they're going to create an obstacle and it won't be productive.
Right. Yeah. So I guess that's kind of the thing that I'm trying to figure out is, the opportunity costs abound, right?
Yeah.
And in any given moment, you have a chance to go fast or continue to build trust and sort of go slower. What framework do you use for making decisions around when you leave people behind, when you try to bring people along, how to nurture and build trust versus execute? Like what is the way in which you're confronting, let's say there's some goal that you're driving towards. And that you know where you should go. You know how to get there.
Yeah. So I'll tell you.
What do you do?
Well, the first thing is, in the book, there's a chapter on intentional team development. Like if you need to be constantly investing in your team, not as a group of individuals just working in a work group together, but actually as a team, which means they actually perform better as a unit together than they do individually. And so what does that mean? And there's a lot I can talk about on that, but developing that, one of my principles is, build self-awareness to build mutual awareness, but developing in that team awareness of each other's work styles and preferences, but frankly, strengths, right? Inventory strengths and areas for development, because then you're going to be in a moment where you're looking at your team, whether that's your direct reports or your first team, your executive team, and there's going to be something where one of you is better suited to that goal. And ideally, you've built the trust and you've made the investment. So my first part of my framework is build the foundation so that when you're in the moment and you say, you know what, I've got this one. Like, guys, trust me, I'm going to drive this thing. And people are like, okay. But you don't always have that luxury, right? But that's one, is if you can build that foundation, you can run faster in the moment after you've spent some time pausing and really getting to know each other and thinking about the inventory of the skills in your immediate sort of work team. So that's one. I think the other is, I explain actually also on the building self-awareness front in the book that there's a lot of work style assessments like Myers-Briggs, MBTI, or I talk about insights discovery. There's Enneagram, there's DISC. You can take all of these. There's the big 5. And I talk about, they all boil down to me to like 2 axes. One is, are you more task-oriented or people-oriented? And the other is, are you more extroverted or introverted? And you can sort of see like a little matrix there in front of you, and you sort of a quadrant, like you've got the 4 quadrants. I'm very task and extroverted, or I'm very people and extroverted. And you think about, well, where might I kind of fall? And you can sort of shortcut some of that. And I'm going to give you a tangent, but I think it's an interesting one. One of my favorite interview questions, especially for certain teams that I hire for, is I say to the individual, okay, let's say we hire you at Stripe. And you're in your first few weeks on the job, and you're sitting in, and this is back, like, let's pretend we're all together in the workplace for a second, but this could also happen virtually. But you're sitting like having lunch with 5 other Stripes. No, everyone's from different teams, but you're just getting to know each other. You're kind of new. You're getting to know some engineers, some people from finance. And I walk up, I'm the COO, and I walk up to the table and I say to you all, hey, the executive team has this really important question we're trying to answer. We're looking for a few smart folks from Stripe to just create a team for the next 2 weeks and look at this problem we have and do some analysis, do some thinking together, and come up with a recommendation on what we should do. You know, it might be a product issue, might be a sales. And I've just randomly assigned 5 people into a team. And I asked this individual, I say, so give me a sense of what role you would play in that team. And the people who pass that interview question usually, first of all, say, well, I would make an assessment of what does the team need. And I would sort of try to understand the nature of the problem, really what the scope of what we're meant to do is, and then figure out what role I could play. And I'd say, okay, well, what role would you gravitate toward? And a lot of people we hire at Stripe tend to be like, well, I tend to gravitate toward leading to get the project done, right? Well, how would you do that? Like, I do this whole deep dive with them on what do they know about their behavioral inclinations when faced with a big assignment? And then how would they interact with the people around them to actually get it done in a way that was inclusive, but frankly, maximize the outcome by taking advantage of the other skills at the table? And too often people immediately jump to, well, I would appoint myself the project leader. I would make a project plan. I would do this. I do the analysis. And then I would, and I'm like, oh, that's interesting. How's the rest of the team doing? You know, but I think the framework is really take that minute and do an assessment, do an inventory. What are your skills and abilities? What are the skills and abilities of the people around you? What are the inclinations? And honestly, I really believe you could spend, even if you were under deep pressure, you could spend 1 hour and end up with a vastly better outcome if you just set that groundwork.
That's actually one of the exercises from the book. And when I say that, referring to kind of the exercises to know yourself.
Yes.
Know your strengths, know your weaknesses. Yes. And I've got a note in my phone that I thought was just going to be, a little 20-minute, has become 6 pages at this point, of just me going through these exercises because I really appreciated how you guide us through that. There's an element when we're talking about, I'm hearing us talk about transparency, the trust, the need for empathy, being emotionally intelligent, and all those things. And there is a story that's sticking out to me, and it introduces this word of vulnerability, and from the book. And I would love if you could share this story, if you're willing to, of crying in your one-on-one with your manager and how that played out after that. Would you be willing to kind of go through that story? And I really love to key in on, your performance reviews and how that manifested itself with you.
Yeah, I mean, I am not. I mean, if you were going to key in on something that I have to recognize as a blind spot, I tend to not ask for help easily. I tend to be the person who's sort of highly competent, taking on the extra workload and just making it work. And I've had to really learn about that blind spot, which is like I can be too independent. Like, it's funny because when I'm in my day-to-day work, I'm actually better at delegating and asking for help. But when I'm under a lot of pressure, I can get quite independent and less communicative and less willing to be vulnerable.
And you list off all the stuff you were in that moment, and it was, I felt it. I wanted to cry.
Oh, well, that's nice. I just had all of a sudden ended up at a point in Google where I think now in retrospect, like I think I was identified as a talented person. They were investing in me as a potential future leader to take on more. And I was just getting tapped for every assignment somehow, which was a combination of I had just taken on leading a much bigger remit. So I was the manager suddenly of a bunch of peers, and I was leading a new set of products that we were trying to bring to market in addition to our regular AdWords product. And then I've been asked to help with the YouTube integration. We just bought YouTube, and I was suddenly leading the operations team of YouTube, of a company. It's like in my quote unquote spare time. And I had a young, at the time, very young child. My daughter was probably like 1 or 2 years old. And I was still figuring that out, and my husband and I were both working full time and balancing being new parents. And I remember I had driven to San Bruno, which is where YouTube has its office, which is what I would do every Wednesday while I was their leader part-time, and spend time with that team. And I remember on the drive back to Mountain View thinking, this is ridiculous. Like, this is, the thing that really broke me, the book is about humans and people. I was not doing right by the YouTube operations team. And frankly, for the customers and the product, because there were so many things that needed to be addressed. I can't even start to tell you, but it was really kind of terrifying how much work needed to be done. And there was no way I could just do that in 1 or 2 days a week. And I think that's what really broke me, the realization that I was not doing right by the team. And so I end up in a one-on-one with my manager at the time, who's such a nice guy, but had his own, we were all drowning, at Google at that stage of the company. But I started to talk to him about feeling, like I was having trouble with my priorities. And I started to cry. And I was not someone who normally is super. And by the way, so many people cry in one-on-ones with me. It's very normal. But at the time, I was mortified. And I felt like this is not me. And he was baffled because it was really not me. And to his credit, he was like, okay, this is serious. We have a serious problem. You are breaking. I was definitely breaking. And I couldn't do it all. And it took, I had to be at a real limit to admit that. But we immediately started brainstorming about my list, which I do with so many people now. I'm like, all right, let's list out. What are all your jobs? What are all the things? And what are the priorities? And then what are you going to do differently? And in that case, I went and recruited a full-time leader for YouTube's operations, who then actually ended up becoming, for a time, sort of the COO of YouTube after we'd acquired it, who's a great guy who's still a friend of mine. But by the way, convincing him to take that job was a sales job by me. But he is glad in the end. I'll just say that. And then the joke in the book is that Google at the time had this performance designation, this rating that after a quarter, you could get anywhere, in theory, from a 1 to a 5, but most everybody's getting between a 3 and a 4. And I was talking to some other managers and they were like, no one gets a 5. It's like a joke. They're like, they just put it there so that there's a scale. And I said sheepishly, I once got a 5. And they're like, you did? And I said, well, I think it's because I had a mental breakdown in my manager's office because I couldn't do all my work. But now I can laugh about it and talk about it. But even then, admitting that I'd cried in the office and been rewarded somehow was hard for me. It's hard to be vulnerable, but you're right. It's extremely effective. Now, today, I think it's something I'm so much more comfortable doing. Is talking about failure, talking about difficult things I've faced. And I wish that for people, getting to that point where you realize sharing your human experience is how you create a better human experience for others. But when you're early in your career, it's very hard, right? You're feeling very ambitious and you don't want to be viewed as needing help or of stumbling. You don't want to be viewed as stumbling. And it's very hard.
Yeah, I think for me, early in my career, I didn't want to be vulnerable because I was scared that they might actually see me for who I was. I wasn't comfortable being me.
Because you felt like a fraud, or what?
Yeah, I think I felt inadequate, and I felt like I didn't really know what I was doing. And I would say even now, I still to this day have struggles with that, being vulnerable in certain areas, because I think wherever our greatest weaknesses are, which is actually where we actually are vulnerable, we want to be least vulnerable. And so how have you thought about scaling vulnerability? How have you thought about that?
She manufactures vulnerability in tears every meeting. Yeah, I guess I'm gonna start doing that with you.
But it's kind of it's kind of an interesting question though, because vulnerability really is the basis of
catalyst.
Meaningful relationship. Yep. But vulnerability takes time and takes tremendous care. And frankly, you just don't have enough time in the day to be vulnerable with everyone you come in contact with. It's not like you can walk up to the barista at the coffee shop and be like, boy, last night I had this really blowout fight with my wife and it's been really tough. She'd be like, okay.
Sir, this is a Wendy's.
Yeah, exactly.
The sequel to Scaling People, I don't know if it's going to be Scaling Vulnerability, which is, you're right, not a thing that feels like you really scale easily. I think, one of the I describe my own personal sort of leadership principles. One of them is the build self-awareness to build mutual awareness. But the next one is say the thing you think you cannot say. And that is a form of vulnerability, which is taking some risks with sharing the thing that's truly happening, truly on your mind. Sometimes that's business related, sometimes it's personal. But I think it's about risk taking. And I think actually one worry I have, and it's interesting, Brent, to hear you talk about that. Like, I think a lot of men in particular get, this is a challenge for all of us who are parents, which is we very unconsciously are less comfortable, I think, with boys sometimes being vulnerable or emotional or asking for help. And I think that's changing. But it's even harder, I find, because I manage a lot of men and women. People identify as men and women. And I think that it's harder sometimes to get the men to have the real conversation with me about what's going on. And it's because it's been ingrained in them not to take the risk by sharing sort of what I call the real thing.
Right.
And you do have to do work. You can't just like insert, hey, tell me something scary that you faced yesterday, right? You can't just insert that in a conversation. You have to build the relationship.
I deeply resonate with this because I'm a father of 4 boys, 10, 9, at the time of this, 10, 9, 6, 4. And we're very conscious of this concept of being an emotionally present man.
Yeah.
And my wife and I, like you said, we have to be really intentional about it. We read this book called Raising Emotionally Healthy Boys that came out last year. And I joked, I was like, this might as well have been, raising emotionally healthy man. Like, it just is about yourself. You're like becoming an emotionally healthy man, reading this stuff about how to parent your kids. It starts with you. So much so that my wife and I, at dinner, we try to do family dinners at least consistently each week. And she kind of had to prod me, but I started doing it on my own now, is sharing my feelings about something going on in my life. So using emotional words to give them not just, oh, I'm happy or I'm angry or I'm frustrated.
It's not just this thing happened.
Yeah.
It's I had a feeling about it, right? Yes. And by the way, every parent sharing failure, that's what a lot of the advice is. Actually don't come home and brag about the good thing that happened that day. Talk about the hard thing and the failure and the mistake you made. And it's too often we just don't as parents.
It seems connected to me in this moment. You go back to that story of taking on so much at Google and crying in the one-on-one. You just had a 1 or 2 year old. And when I read that, Brent's got 3 girls, I've got 4 boys, my eyebrows went up.
By the way, I love both of you. Wow. That's a lot.
We're friends actually too. And our kids hang out every now and then.
That's a lot. Sorry to finish your question.
No, that's great. Well, my question is this, you're someone who's had a lot of success for a sustained period of time, and yet you make this choice to become a parent. How do you balance? What's been your approach? You don't strike me as someone who just kind of is figuring out as you go. What's been your approach to have connection with your kids and with your husband, but also be successful and accomplish the things you want to accomplish in your companies?
Yeah. Well, I first do want to give credit to, it feels like every decade you start to see things change, but I was very fortunate. Working at Google for almost 11 years and now Stripe for 8+ years. These are both companies that welcome a conversation about what's going on in your personal life, in your family, and being able to say, hey, my kid has a doctor's appointment and I'm going to be late. And having that be allowable is incredibly important. And it was not the case 20 years ago in a lot of companies. And so I feel very fortunate that I was in places where that didn't feel like a strange thing to have to demarcate, meaning I have boundaries and I have things I do for my kids, right? But I think my framework for what I don't think is really balance, it's more about how do you integrate all the parts of your life and yourself, is that one, recognize, it actually comes back to the crying in the one-on-one. You are going to have a set of priorities. These are the things that you're really going to protect. And you are going to have to make trade-offs. I like to say a strategy should hurt, and that's true for your personal strategy. And my personal sort of, it's more looking back that I can say this, which is I prioritize my work and my immediate family above, for example, I have not seen a lot of my friends for many years very often, right? Or I'm not very good at making plans with friends. And my friends luckily still love me and they know that. But I think that I have to like pick up my dog and put her on the sofa.
I was going to say,
she's going to keep barking at us. Yes, hold on.
Bring him on.
Sorry, she's an older dog and she is a small dog and she's not supposed to jump on her own. And she likes to show me she's the boss by yelling at me until I pick her up and put her on the sofa.
So, Dachshund, right?
Yes, exactly. She's
to me, that's the funniest. That's the most comedic dog.
They're so comedic. The best thing about having Dachshunds is you walk down the street and you realize you look extremely eccentric, but also people smile as they drive by. Like they can't help but smile because the dogs are so comedic. So you're exactly right. But anyway, point is the formula is one, recognize you're going to make trade-offs. And I think later I also added I have to exercise into my list, but like what were things that were really needed to be protected? But some of the other trade-offs I made is like until recently, I have a great partner. I never was the one to do drop-off or pickup at school until recently. And of course now I have surly teenagers who don't even talk to me. But it's just I was not, volunteering at the school. And there would be other moms who would say things that were sort of passive aggressive, like, oh, we never see you. Are you still traveling so much for work? And that is whatever. Like, I get it. But I think we can all support each other's decisions on what's important. But did I ever miss a parent-teacher conference? No, I never did. I never did. And I think I like to point out to people, Barack Obama made it to his parent-teacher conference. And so I'm pretty sure you can. And performances. But I missed a lot of sports games. I mean, I think there's just going to be choices you make. But be intentional about them. And also recognize there's, maybe it's a 10-year period that you're making these choices. And you can make different choices 10 years later, which is what I'm doing now. And that's really a privilege, by the way, to be able to reassess and reset your priorities. And I feel lucky I can. But I think too many people, one, make assumptions about what hard work is and what it looks like, and they don't integrate their family into that. And two, don't realize, yes, there are trade-offs. And then they try to do it all, and then they burn out.
Yeah. Maybe you could talk about, I feel like motivation is kind of the bullseye of what we're talking about right now. Yeah. And it feels like that you've talked about how some principles that you had have endured from your 20s now into your 40s. Is it, I guess, how have your motivations changed over time? And if you could go back and like talk to your 25-year-old self about the motivations you had then, what advice would you give her about the things that maybe you shouldn't have been motivated by that you actually were?
I think that one of the things that has been true, I think it had to do, you remember my parents were teachers. And I think there's a real thing about teaching, which is these individual acts that over time you feel and you hope add up collectively to a larger impact, right? If I can touch this one person, they will make their own choices in the world that will hopefully create a positive impact for others. And for, whether, you inspire someone to become a writer or you inspire someone to also become a teacher. But I think I've always cared about impact through other people. And I think that's from my parents and their example and our family dinner table and the conversations we had, but also that it was not acceptable to just not care about the world. Like, what's happening? Like, how do I make things better was a thing that was often what was cared about in my family. And I then found myself sort of like, well, what does that look like for me? And it started for me, I really thought I was going to work in government and politics. I thought I was going to go to law school. I had a lot of thoughts in my 20s about, how am I going to get in this position of impact? And I actually don't, I've said before, like I rarely look back and I'm not someone who makes a decision, goes back and remakes or regrets it. I think that what I appreciated about my young self that I would still cheer on is I took some risks that other people weren't taking. Meaning, for example, I graduated from college without having lined up a job and went and got a job on a political campaign. And that was actually, talk about vulnerability, that summer, there I was living back at my parents' house thinking, oh my gosh, there's all these expectations. I just graduated from honors from this great university. And what am I going to do with my life? And getting pretty depressed and terrified. But I came out of that with a few years of really interesting experience working, in campaigns, which are very entrepreneurial and scrappy and fascinating. And you get a ton of responsibility as a young person. And you also have to learn how to lead through influence, right? You've got all these volunteers. If you're not a good leader, they're not going to come back the next day. I mean, I think that was an amazing experience, but also, low paid and scary. And then even when I quit my consulting job after business school and moved to California with no job with my then boyfriend, now husband, we were like unemployed, renting an apartment in San Francisco, and our families thought we were nuts. And this was right after the sort of 2001 bust, right? .com bust. I think I just had optimism that I would figure it out, and I didn't have to trode on the path that others had. And that I would go back and sort of salute, I guess, is what I would say. But if I could tell myself something, it would probably be more in tune with what you're learning about, not just about yourself, but I think ask for help, ask for advice. Like I only till I got to Stripe, like at Stripe, we'd face something and Patrick and John would be like, Claire, who have you called to ask for advice about this thing we're facing? And I would think, oh my gosh, no one? Like I thought we would just figure it out. And they're like, no, we must ask everyone, like accumulate knowledge. Keep accumulating knowledge and keep asking for advice. And I think I wish I had done more of that earlier.
One of the concepts you talk about in the book, I want to ask you here, what is the difference between a strong manager and a true leader?
Yeah. I mean, management and leadership are different, in my opinion. Some people don't agree with that. But I think management is very knowable. It's actually quite trainable. It's like, take this set of individuals and you have this task, this thing you need to get done, and organize them. And it's not easy, by the way, but you can do it. Whereas I think leadership is much more about the ambition, the vision, the aspiration, and frankly, the sort of inspiration. Right? Yeah, I'm going to tell this story. I'm going to paint this picture. I don't have all the answers to how we're even going to achieve this thing, but I'm going to lead you into creating it. And you are going to trust me and follow me. That is it's uncomfortable. Leadership is extremely uncomfortable, especially for me. I like to have the knowable thing where I can make a plan and have a spreadsheet and have a timeline and say, Anna is going to be in charge of work stream 2 and work stream 2 is going to have a milestone in week 3. Like that is much easier to me than sort of describing we are going to solve this insane problem 2 years from now. And believe me, like asking for people to trust you that you are. I mean, I remember when I started at Stripe, we had our support situation for our product, like it was on fire. I mean, we could not get back to our customers. We were having to have every engineer, everyone in the company drop everything on Friday afternoons and get in and respond to customer inquiries. And I found myself describing, we are going to end up in a world where we can support millions of merchants of Stripe in 24/7 globally in multiple languages with multiple channels like chat, email, phone. And I'm telling this story and I was like, I have no idea how we're going to get there, but I really needed them to believe we could. And that was leadership, right? And we did, by the way, we did, but it was hard and it was painful and I could not have done it without some of the people I hired, but I had to lead us to a place that even I didn't know existed in reality, right? That's very different than management.
Claire, one of the things that I've just been in awe of as I've read about your background is, I mean, you've taken now Stripe from when you started, it was about 200 employees to more than 8,000. And you really touched, I mean, between Google and Stripe, you touched like every area of business. I mean, whether it's sales, marketing, customer, risk, real estate, I mean, literally everything. So you've had this incredible view of smaller companies, of bigger companies, of how to take something from smaller to bigger and hit scale. And, our audience are small business owners and operators. And one of the things we talk about a lot is small businesses don't stay small on purpose. Most people want to grow, right? With very few exceptions. Everyone wants to be more profitable, larger, serve more customers. The struggle is, how do you get there? And so the question I have for you is, let's say that Permanent Equity had just acquired a 150-person business, successful. It's got a great business model, but it's just really kind of been at the same level for maybe the last 10 years. And you're the new CEO and you get dropped in, what is your process for understanding why the business has stayed small? What's your process for getting a lay of the land and understanding and prioritizing projects that you'd want to pursue? Like, what would you do? What would the first maybe 3 months look like, 6 months look like, 2 years look like? Like, just walk us through your vision for transformation.
And then would you also come do that?
Exactly. We got a couple jobs for you. I know you're looking for a job now. Yeah. So anyway.
Wait a minute. My favorite, like the first thing I did when I joined Stripe, as I said, is 160 people, is I tried to meet everyone one-on-one. And that was in the end, there was a couple of smaller group meetings and there were some, 15-minute pretty quick meetings, but I really tried to meet everyone one-on-one and just like any good consultant, interview them and ask, what should I know? What do I need to know? Where are the opportunities? Where are the gotchas? And I think my first instinct would be, deeply, like really, really listen and look at the numbers, listen to the history, talk to people. And most companies know what they would need to do to grow or what choices they made that might have just made them sort of not grow in the way that they could have. And by the way, the people who know that are at all levels, in my opinion. This is not just talking. And often some of the challenges maybe is sort of a pattern the leadership team has gotten into that is actually preventing realizing potential. So I would start at very different, I'd really be sampling from across the whole company to understand where are the opportunities. And most people do know. And then you go through all those notes and you synthesize it. And usually in my experience, like 80% of what needs to happen has been written. And then you've got to do the 20%. I mean, you could try an 80-20 rule and just go with that. But I think the value is adding your own sort of looking at the macro environment, looking at meaning the competition, the trends, it depends on what the business it's in, but where is the world going? Where is this particular industry going? Where is the product going? And thinking, okay, what do I add into that thing they all already know that might create more vision, right? Because you need the inspiration too. You need to say, let's marry what we already know about how we could be better with some things happening in the world and paint a picture of the role we could play. I'm actually on the board of a company where I didn't mean this to be the case, but at our last board meeting, this is a company that's sort of in this bucket where they're kind of hitting a growth stage, but they've been public for more than 10 years. I think they have so much potential in front of them. They're in the climate space. They're a clean tech sort of integrator. And I said in the last meeting, I said, I think you all have earned the right to call yourself a thought leader at a time when people are looking for some thoughts in this space, right? People who really know how to do the work to transform, dirty energy into clean. And you all know it. And why don't you step up and own it? And talk to policymakers, talk to the industry. And the CEO keeps repeating this. He's like, you're the one. You told us we could be the thought leader. He had just been sort of stuck because there was no thought leader to look to. And he realized, oh my God, it could be me. And you need that kind of moment with the people in the company, which is that could be you. And so I think it's that combination of what they know and then what's happening in the world, creating that vision moment where they realize we could do that. And then making a really smart plan. I mean, I am the first person you will find who's like, okay, how do we make this a reality? What roles do people play? What numbers do we need to put on the table? And frankly, what do we need to look at? I mean, there's always some pattern that you've fallen into in how you run things, some system you use, some process you use, some assumption where you need to break it. I'm on another board where they have a pattern of how they think about their go-to-market, and it's very tied to how they position the product, like package the product. And I found myself saying, you all have created almost a prison cell that you must package the product this certain way because you go to market this certain way. And what if I just said to you, you don't have to do that? Like you could actually go to market differently, and then that would free you on how you package the product. And everyone in the room was looking at me like I had said, an incredibly scandalous thing. But also I hope thinking, wow, we have been in this pattern because this pattern has been so successful. We never thought it could be a bad thing, right? You never think the thing that has been your success engine can start to hurt you, especially if we're talking about multiple years. Yeah. And I think just being the person who's again, unafraid to say the thing you think you cannot say, right? Mm-hmm. And put it on the table and then listen and be empathetic and let people react. That's what my plan would be.
Yeah. Well, so can we just talk briefly about planning versus the plan? Because I guess in my experience, I think there's tremendous value in planning.
Yes.
And then at least in my organizations that we're involved with, I rarely see things work out how they're planned.
Yeah.
So how do you, first of all, do you agree with that? And then second of all, how do you advise teams to both have a plan and be flexible at the same time? Because those seem like a paradox. So those can't both be true at the same time.
Yeah. I mean, it was Eisenhower who said, plan is nothing, planning is everything. And then there's another one that's like, it's great to have a plan until reality punches you in the face.
Yeah, I think that was the great Mike Tyson, the great philosopher.
Yes, exactly.
Everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face.
Yeah, exactly. I love that. I love that. I'm a believer too. I am. I would say with the following caveat. So do the planning, realize reality will punch you in the face, and build resilience, right? Build adaptability into your culture and how you handle the fact that you can't really stick to the plan. That said, the framework I use in the book is one I really like. And I talk about sports a lot because I think because in sports, you're just like putting people under pressure in a real time situation and then seeing like who can actually lead, like can your team perform? And one of the things I don't love is when your plan gets upended and you sort of go back to zero when really you do know a lot. You know what winning looks like overall. You kind of know the rules of the game. Like you wouldn't put people on a playing field without the right equipment and without a sense of the rules or how to keep score because they're just like people get hurt. So you want to get yourself in a frame where people understand these are the sort of constraints we're in. This is what the score should look like at the end. And when you adapt, when your plan is wrong, keeping those things at the front and center is, I think, really important. Like at Stripe, we have these company targets we set up. They're sort of like, think of them as a big billboard of like, we'd like these outcome numbers and these things. We also have zero targets, like 0 security incidents. You know what I mean? And we say like, these things are what we're going to keep score on for this year. And I think reminding people of that is also important. Like, yes, you'll adjust your plan, but why you play and what you're playing for is still going to be the same.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that jives with my experience as well. One thing I want to end with, and maybe this is the last question. You talked about direct, brutal feedback as being sometimes the most effective way to communicate in a company, which sounds very tech, Silicon Valley, kind of hard-hitting, no BS type strategy. And then you pair it with, but it requires a company culture that is kind by default, which is it seems like, again, these two things don't fit together easily. Maybe you could send us off with how, as a business owner and operator, can I build kindness into the DNA of my company? And how can I help people become more kind by cultural default?
Yeah, I think, I will do my best here, but I think this really is one of the key questions for people who want to have a really good feedback culture, but then this thing happens where people feel like, well, if I'm giving feedback, I'm not being nice. And then they stop giving feedback, or they start giving feedback and they do it a little bit too brutally, right? Like, how do you get that continuum right? I have a quote in the book from Don Hall. At one time, I was on the board of Hallmark, which is a private company, but it's actually quite a big company. It's a very interesting company that owns Crayola and a media set of channels and also, obviously, Hallmark cards. But Don says, in a business environment, you need to be brutally honest. And to be brutally honest, you can't have a culture that's brutal. And I think that's the line we're talking about here. And here's what I would offer, which is so much of really productive discussion, feedback, open, honest conversations, in my mind, are about curiosity and framing. So instead of like, I thought that presentation was terrible, like, how do you frame asking for feedback? What could I have done differently? What could I have done to make that meeting more successful? So setting a culture of asking for dialogue about improvement and setting that example yourself. And then also starting any kind of inquiry with a curiosity about how did you think that went? right? How do you think we did? I mean, what that thing, by the way, could be, how did you think that customer conference we just threw went? How did you think that sales call went? And letting self-reflection happen. There's been a lot of study of students, and the most productive learning mode for students, especially younger kids, is their own self-assessment first. And I just cannot hammer on that enough. Where is kindness in that? Kindness is in asking and saying, I care about you and what you think about how you're doing. Like, tell me how you would assess this thing that happened. Let them talk. And then the most kind thing we all can do for one another, which is why I feel like it's a luxury to be on this podcast with you, is listen to one another. Ask the question, listen to the answer, build off the answer, offer your own ideas, create dialogue that is about support of being better, as opposed to definitive, declarative statements that things are bad, right? That's just like, honestly, or that people feel, you don't want people to feel bad or judged. I say in the book, be an explorer, not a lecturer, as someone who's coaching an individual or coaching a team. Understand what other people think about what's happening, get to the root cause together, work on the solution together, be introspective. And the entire time, it is not about judging, it is about learning and asking people what they know and building on that. And I think that is kindness, because that is respect. And if you don't have that conversation, it's actually very unkind that you're thinking these things and not saying them. How do you frame them and say them in a way that it is comfortable for everyone to participate? That is the thing you must solve.
Thank you to Claire for coming on the Permanent Podcast today. You can check out the show notes for a link to Claire's book, Scaling People. If I didn't already convince you to buy it, then you obviously hate me, or you hate Claire, or you hate good books. So you're just going to have to own that. Think with me for a moment, who is someone that would enjoy today's podcast? Who is someone that would benefit from Claire's book? Do you have someone in mind? I'm thinking of a friend of mine who is trying to grow her team, not only in size, but in effectiveness. So I'm going to open up my text messages right now. Hey, have you heard of Claire Hughes Johnson and her book, Scaling People? I learned so much from this podcast and her book and thought of you. Done. Send. Lives changed from one moment of thoughtfulness. Speaking of lives being changed, did you know that we have a newsletter for operators called The Permanent Playbook? Go to permanentequity.com and look for the content tab and newsletters. Sarah, my partner here, does an incredible job of curating each newsletter around a tactical and practical theme with a good mix of short form and long form helpful content. Sign up for the Permanent Playbook at permanentequity.com. Thanks for listening. Have a great day.
This podcast is made available solely for educational purposes, and the information presented here does not constitute investment, legal, tax, or other professional advice, and should not be construed as an offering of advisory services or as a solicitation to buy, an offer to sell, or a recommendation of any securities or other financial instruments. The thoughts and opinions expressed by or through this podcast are those of the individual guests and speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views of Permanent Equity. The discussion on this podcast of any entity, product, or service does not imply an endorsement thereof, and the guests of this podcast may have a financial interest, whether through investment or otherwise, in any one or more of such entities, products, or services. This podcast is presented by Permanent Equity and may not be copied, reproduced, republished, or posted in any form without its express written consent.